In October of 1891, a coffin nearly 9 feet long was carried into a small Pennsylvania cemetery under heavy rain. By sunrise, it was gone. No grave robbers were reported. No family came forward. And according to one local account, armed soldiers arrived before dawn and ordered the cemetery sealed for 2 days. But the strangest part was not the missing coffin. It was the man inside it. According to the Undertaker who prepared the body, the corpse measured more than 9 feet tall, with unusually long hands, severe joint deformities, and skin described as gray beneath the lantern light. For decades, the story was dismissed as frontier folklore, until a damaged ledger surfaced in a county archive nearly 80 years later. And in the margin of one page, beside the burial date, someone had written 4 words: removed by federal request. The town of Bell's Crossing no longer exists in any meaningful way. Today, only fragments remain: broken foundations, collapsed timber structures, and a church bell lying half-buried near the edge of a forest. But in 1891, Bell's Crossing was a crowded railway settlement surrounded by coal routes, sawmills, and boarding houses filled with laborers moving westward. The winters were harsh there. Records describe freezing fog rolling through the valley before sunrise, covering the streets in silence. Horses often vanished into the mist only yards ahead of their drivers. It was in this isolated town that Undertaker Edwin Mercer operated a modest funeral parlor beside the rail depot. Mercer was not known for exaggeration. In fact, surviving town records suggest the opposite. He was methodical, quiet, precise. He kept handwritten measurements of nearly every body he prepared: scars, injuries, clothing, and even weather conditions on burial days. That habit would later become important, because on November 3, 1891, Mercer documented a corpse unlike anything in his records before or after. The entry simply read, "Male, unknown origin, height extraordinary." But that was not the strangest part. Beneath the line describing the body's height, Mercer added another sentence in smaller handwriting: military men arrived before embalming completed. According to local accounts collected decades later, the body arrived shortly after midnight aboard a freight wagon escorted by 2 armed men wearing dark wool military coats without insignia. No death certificate accompanied the corpse. No name, no family, only a sealed transport order signed by Deputy Elias Crow. Crow himself remains a difficult figure to understand. Official county minutes show he handled tax disputes and rail permits. Yet several surviving letters suggest he also communicated with military officials from Pittsburgh during the autumn of 1891. Why a county deputy would be involved in transporting an unidentified body was never explained. What happened next made no sense. Mercer later told a local minister that the coffin had to be specially built from unfinished pine because no standard casket in town was large enough. One carpenter reportedly refused the work entirely after seeing the measurements. And this is where the story becomes difficult to dismiss, because Mercer's ledger includes exact dimensions. Length, 8 feet, 11 inches. Shoulder width, 38 inches. Hands disproportionately elongated. If exaggerated, the measurements were strangely consistent. Before we go further, remember that detail: Mercer measured everything, and he never recorded another body remotely close to those dimensions again. 3 days after the body arrived, a woman named Martha Vale visited Mercer's parlor. Her statement survives only through fragments of a newspaper interview published in 1932. According to the article, Vale claimed she had seen the man alive shortly before his death at a boarding house near the rail line. She described him as painfully thin, stooped, and unable to stand fully upright indoors. But one detail disturbed investigators later. Vale insisted the man never spoke. Not once. Instead, she claimed another man answered questions for him, a heavily dressed companion who refused to give names and paid entirely in silver coins. Whether the account was accurate or exaggerated, one detail remains difficult to explain. Vale described the giant's hands before the body was ever publicly discussed. The fingers, she said, looked too long for the rest of him. Keep that description in mind, because it appears again near the end. The official burial took place on November 7th. Rain fell most of the evening. Only 5 people reportedly attended. Mercer, Deputy Crow, 2 gravediggers, and a military officer identified years later as Captain Roland Whitaker. No church service was recorded. No obituary appeared in local newspapers. And the burial location itself was strangely absent from cemetery maps printed the following year. For decades, nobody asked why. Then, in 1968, a university archivist examining abandoned county records discovered something unusual inside a water-damaged envelope. A cemetery expense receipt. The receipt listed payment for grave relocation and transport personnel, dated less than 12 hours after the burial itself. The record should have ended there, but it didn't. On the back of the receipt was a second notation written in different ink. Container transferred under military supervision before dawn. Transferred where? No destination was listed. No federal department was named. And every page surrounding the receipt had been partially burned along the edges. Visual. Archivist opening brittle envelope. Burned paper corners. Camera slowly pushing toward handwritten phrase under low light. Around the midpoint of the 20th century, historians began proposing simpler explanations. Some believe the body may have belonged to a man suffering from severe gigantism, a rare medical condition known even in the Victorian era. Others argue the entire event was likely distorted local folklore mixed with fear and rumor. But a discovery in Mercer's personal belongings complicated those explanations. After his death in 1908, a locked wooden chest was reportedly opened by relatives. Inside were funeral receipts, embalming tools, and a folded private letter addressed to no one. The letter survives only as a transcription copied by a local historian in the 1940s. According to that copy, Mercer wrote, "I do not fear the dead man. I fear the reason they reclaimed him." That single sentence changed everything, because until then, most assumed the government removed the coffin to hide embarrassment or prevent public spectacle. Mercer seemed to suggest something else entirely, that the removal had been planned from the beginning. If you were investigating this case, this is the moment where you would stop and ask one question. Who was the body actually meant for? As researchers dug deeper into military transport records from late 1891, another strange detail emerged. A rail manifest from Pittsburgh listed a secured cargo transfer 2 days after the burial. Destination: Washington Barracks Medical Annex. Cargo description: anatomical specimen. No dimensions were included. No sender identified. And one section of the manifest appeared deliberately scratched away. But that was not the strangest part. Attached to the manifest was a reimbursement signature from Captain Roland Whitaker, the same officer allegedly present at the burial. Whitaker's military history remains unusually sparse. Most personnel files from that period contain transfers, commendations, disciplinary notes. His file contains gaps. Entire years missing. Some local records suggest Whitaker later worked alongside military medical researchers studying abnormal skeletal disorders after the Civil War. The story was never fully verified, but in the margin of a forgotten medical inventory from 1892, another sentence appears. Specimen arrived damaged after exhumation. Exhumation, not transport, not recovery. Exhumation, meaning the body had almost certainly been buried first, exactly as Mercer described. By the early 1900s, nearly everyone connected to the event was dead. Mercer passed away in silence. Deputy Crow left Pennsylvania abruptly and never returned. Martha Vale refused further interviews after claiming strangers visited her home asking about the tall border. And Captain Whitaker disappeared from surviving public records altogether after 1894. Yet one final detail continued haunting researchers. In 1971, workers clearing debris near the ruins of Bell's Crossing Cemetery uncovered fragments of an unusually large pine coffin buried beneath collapsed earth. The wood had been split open long ago. No remains were found inside. But embedded in the interior lining were several dark fibers, believed to come from heavy wool military blankets. The coffin had not simply disappeared. It had been emptied. And this is where the mystery becomes hardest to explain. Because according to surviving cemetery records, the original grave was never officially reopened. No exhumation permit exists. No transport authorization survives. Nothing. Only fragments. Half-burned receipts. Missing pages. Contradictory statements. And one Undertaker's private fear. Some historians believe the giant never existed at all. Others argue the case reflects Victorian fascination with physical abnormalities and traveling exhibitions. But even skeptics struggle with one detail. Why remove the coffin in secret, if the story was merely fiction? And why did so many official records vanish afterward? Perhaps the answer was ordinary. Or perhaps Bell's Crossing briefly became the resting place of a man someone powerful did not want remembered. A body too unusual for public burial. A witness too visible to ignore. And maybe that is why Edwin Mercer never described the giant's face in his ledger. Not because he forgot, but because it was the one detail he was afraid to leave behind.